Hello, Longhorns, and welcome to the February Lunchtime Lecture. I'm Chuck Harris, Executive Director of the Texas X's. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I want to give a special shout out to all of those of you who donated to the Texas X's when you registered. Your generosity means the world to us, especially in these challenging times. Because of our members and donors, we've been able to offer you events like these and so much more over the last year. We've also developed valuable new resources for alumni, like Hooked In, the burnt orange online networking platform. Think of it as a LinkedIn for Longhorns. To help many of our alumni-run businesses, we've launched the Longhorn Business Listing, which highlights alumni-owned and operated businesses. We want to encourage you to shop Longhorn. And finally, we have an exciting new bling. If you're looking to add a little fashion to your classroom collection, we've partnered with Kendra Scott and the University Seal Collections to offer Longhorn some great-looking new options to show their UT pride. You can find all these links on our website. Now, on to today's show. We're thrilled to have Professor Juan Miró with us to give his lecture entitled Building a New Arcadia. And Bud Frank from Miró Rivera Architects is going to tell us more about our professor. Bud, take it away.
Hey everyone, my name is Bud Frank. I'm an associate at Miró Rivera Architects, located here in Austin, Texas. To give a little background on myself, I have a 15-year-long history with the Texas X's. I was a Texas Excellence Scholar during my 5 years at UT, which was the precursor to the 40-acre scholarship program. And I also received the Texas X's President's Leadership Award during my final year. Juan was my professor during my second year of architecture school, and we stayed in touch throughout my studies. And my last semester, we shared a studio space, and he approached me in the halls during the final weeks of school and offered me a job. And lo and behold, when I started at Miró Rivera, my first project was the renovation and addition to the north wing of the Texas X's Alumni Center. So it was really like coming full circle right away. And to give you a little more information about Juan, he's a tenured professor and the David Bruton Jr. Centennial Professor in Urban Studies at the University of Texas School of Architecture, where he's taught for over 20 years. He's a fellow in the American Institute of Architects, and he's consistently one of the students' favorite and top-rated professors at the architecture school. He teaches undergraduate design studios, construction, Mexican architectural history, and traveling studios that go to Mexico and Madrid in alternating years. He has a very deep and wide knowledge of Spanish and Mexican architecture and building traditions, and it's really been fun to see how his mind works both in academic and professional settings, and how his academic studies bleed into our architectural work at Miró Rivera. So without further ado, here is Juan Vareau.
Thank you, Bud. It's really a pleasure to be here with the Texas X's. I love the building, the Alumni Center. It's too bad that we cannot do it in person there. For now, it's great that we have other options, but I wish we could be in the same room and we could see each other and we can be part of that building. Like Bud said, I'm going to talk about reflections related to my academic and professional career and all the great opportunities that have happened to me from being able to be in a place like Austin, and how, in a way, the title of Building a New Arcadia is representing what many people experience in Austin, and I am an example of that, a place where I have been able to raise a family and create a career and enjoy a lot of the benefits of being in a place like this. So let's start. So I'm going to say next for the next slide every time. So this is where I have spent, pretty much every day. Many of you will recognize this building, Goldsmith Hall, one of the favorite buildings in the UT campus. A lot of people come to the courtyard. This is a photo with students that like Bud said, Bud was one of these students in his second year, and we were very lucky that he came to work professionally at our architectural office. So I have been combining the academic and the professional life. It means that I have been very busy all the time, but it's been an amazing opportunity to be able to do both. And the experience to work with students has been fantastic. So we not only work at Goldsmith Hall, but if you go to the next, You can see that now in these times of COVID, we have found creative ways to meet outside school. This is my favorite outdoor classroom in Austin, right at Lady Bird Lake. It's a little secret, so I don't tell everybody where it is, because it's like, everybody's going to want to have it. But it's an example of how beautiful Austin is, the ability to have these, so close. And if you go next, like Bud said, the opportunity of teaching and taking students abroad has been fantastic. I take them to Spain and to Mexico alternating. This is a photo in Madrid. Students enjoy the opportunity to learn, while traveling, and it's something that I've done in Mexico also. Next, in Mexico it's been fantastic, because I've been taking students to Mexico since 1999, and we go to many different places. I like to go to different places, so I always said that I probably have traveled in Mexico more than most people even in Mexico. And in this case, for example, we went to visit ruins that were only accessible via rafts, so we had to do through this very rough river to get to them, and it was just fantastic. So this is the kind of thing that I enjoy, learning about new places, and Mexico is a never-ending source of new learning opportunities for me and my students. So go next. Traveling Yucatan, drawing, meeting the people, the other architects, other ancient cultures, indigenous cultures. Here we were exploring the Maya culture in this trip. Go to the next one. And then at the same time, I was starting this architectural practice together with my wife and my brother-in-law, Miguel Rivera. And this is a photograph of Miró Rivera from, it's not exactly, people come and go, but there are a lot of UT alums in this group. Bud is one of them, and some of them as undergrads, some of them as graduate students. And it's been great to continue to work with them as professionals and seeing them grow like Bud, and seeing them become professional architects and contribute. And some of them, have gone into all the places, and they're all over the world now. But it's been a great opportunity to balance those two academic and professional lives. So let me show you now some. Let's go to next. I'm going to show you a little bit like where I come from and Austin have in a way affected the way I have seen how things operate in different places. I come from Madrid. I was born in Barcelona, but I grew up in Madrid, and both Barcelona and Madrid are what we call compact cities that have a very dense urban fabric. And the result are places that, they're fantastic places to live. I love Madrid. We have a place there. We go there every summer. My family and I love to go there. My extended family is all there. So my kids are Texans. They were born in Austin, but they go to Madrid every year. And then if you see next, you can compare this city, with Austin, and they're very different type of cities. The DNA of the city of a city like Madrid is very different than Austin. The density is very different. The way the cities operate are very different, but they're both fantastic places. Many times students tell me that all the time when we go to Madrid. Which one is better? I said they're different. They're not better or worse. They're just different cities with different DNAs, and I enjoy both of them for what they are. So you go next. You can see that the essence of Madrid is based on a city that is very old, and it has a medieval fabric that defined the DNA of the city early on. So this is the way Madrid looked when Austin was being founded. So Austin was being founded from scratch. At the same time, Madrid was already a very consolidated city, but you can see that the fabric was very different. The contrast between the city and the countryside were completely different. That you can see very clearly where the city ends and where the countryside starts. And that's the essence of medieval cities. They were walled cities, and people lived inside, and you were clearly aware when you were outside. And this affected the way the city grew, and the city has been growing without walls with the same kind of DNA. So you go to the next, you can see that fabric that is very dense has continued to be the dominant, even if it's more organized and more orderly and wider streets. The essence of the city has been developed around this DNA that the city developed early on. So you go next, you can see that the city as a whole now has continued to grow and expand, but it's still a pretty dense city compared with Austin. So you go to the next one, you can see that Austin at the same scale and with almost curiously, they have about the same area. The surface area of both cities is about the same, but in Madrid there are 5 times more people living in the same amount of space. So that affects everything about how the city operates, in terms of how people live, how people move, how people, experience the city. Again, no worse or better, it's just different. So Austin has 5 times less density than Madrid. So you go to the next one, you start investigating things that I have noticed through my travels. Since I came to the Americas, when I came to the US, as an immigrant, and I came to the US, I came to do graduate studies in the US with a Fulbright, and that, and I stay here instead of going back to Spain. So I start understanding where things come from. So when I travel in Mexico with my students, I notice this is the image that I see every day when I go to my house. And when you show a city like this, and most people think that that's a park that you're looking at. No, that's the city. So it's an urban forest. And when I think about this, go to the next one, you can see that while traveling, all of a sudden, I remember being in Tikal with my students, and was saying, well, this reminds me of something, and you look at Tikal, it's an ancient city in Guatemala that the Maya built. It was abandoned in the 8th century. It's not that different than Austin today from the point of view of the way the city operated. It's a city in a forest. There's a downtown with taller buildings that go above the canopy, but the majority of people live in single family houses. This is a very kind of weird kind of parallel, because obviously, Tikal is a very different place, but all of a sudden the density was about the same, curiously enough. No cars, obviously, in Tikal, but these 2 cities have about the same density, and they have a way of dealing with the environment that it was an interesting precedent that I didn't know, and it doesn't exist in Europe. So when you go next, you start understanding how and why these places are the way they are. And this is one of the things that I investigate in a lot of my classes from the point of view of the understanding of ancient architecture in Mexico, and discovering that it's not that different from everywhere across the Americas. So when you go to Machu Picchu and you go to the sacred stone, you realize that people in ancient America related to nature in a very different way that we do now. So they build this sacred stone to reproduce the sacred mountain to the east. So they have a very particular way to relate to nature that was based on the fact that nature was sacred and nature was revered. And they tried to integrate what they built in their architecture was trying to integrate into the natural environment. So when you go to Mexico next, you go to all the pyramids in Mexico, like Teotihuacan, one of the most fascinating places in the world, in my view. The big pyramids that they built were reproductions of the sacred mountains. The sacred mountains had temples on top. They built their own man-made mountains to reproduce and integrate themselves into the sacred environment. This happens also in North America, in the New Mexico. You go next, you can see that in much smaller civilizations with smaller towns and smaller cities. Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities in the world. Taos in New Mexico is a small town, but it was based on the same principles. They were trying to frame the view to the sacred mountain. There was the source of the water that came, the river that cut through the town. So they're building their man-made environments to integrate themselves in nature. And this is a very important thing. When you go to the next one, you can see that the diagram that I'm showing here is trying to see how the ancients understood the world. The sacred was in the natural phenomena, natural creatures, and the fauna and the flora and the earth, the sky, the water. So those are the things that were sacred, and the human beings were part of that way of understanding nature. This started to change when the classical times in Greece. If you go next, you can see that the Greek gods started to humanize the gods, and the gods separated themselves from that reading of nature. And eventually all the monotheist religions next, the monotheist religions started to create gods that were the creators. So God became the creator of nature and the creator of human beings. And so human beings all of a sudden next started to relate to God and to nature in different ways. God was the creator of nature, therefore is the one that needs to be at the top of everything else. And so the relationship with nature changed in ways that we're seeing now that is affecting the way the planet and all the issues that are coming from not paying enough attention to the impact that humans have on nature. So for some, basically becoming almost like a world awareness that we're creating now, that maybe we need to start thinking about nature in another way. And if you go next, you can see a diagram that's trying to say, okay, maybe we need to go back to revering nature in a way that it allows for the planet to survive all the challenges that we are putting on it. And so reconnecting with nature, whatever that means, it doesn't need to be at the religious way that it happened in ancient times, that was embedded in everything. In one way or another, we need to reconnect with nature if we want to understand how we can be less harmful to the nature around us. So this affects everything, just not only the architecture. Go next to the cities and the way the architecture developed. So in the way architecture developed is a very interesting evolution. When you think about classical architecture from Greece and you look at the Supreme Court in the US, you wonder, why would they use that language for the architecture? So architecture as a discipline became dominated by the ideas that were developed in the classical time of Rome and Greece. And this type of architecture is an architecture that is not necessarily trying to connect with nature. It's trying to, in a way, establish its own language, its own discipline, its own logic, its own way of operating. And this is something that architects have a struggle with. And in the US, you go next, the most famous architect in the US history, Frank Lloyd Wright, is probably the only architect that is famous outside architecture circles. He was going crazy with the fact that the US adopted that classical language from Europe. He was always saying, no, that's not the architecture that we need to embrace. We need to embrace an architecture that connects with the land. And basically, he created organic architecture. This is one of the most famous buildings, right, in the US, the Falling Water. It's a house that feels like connected to the ground. It's an extension of the environment. And he thought that architecture should follow that strong connection with the land. So in a way, he was connecting with the way pre-Columbian cultures were trying to connect with the land, and was trying to advocate for an architecture that it was primarily, getting its logic from the site where it was built. So you go next, there are architects that have followed that path. Fay Jones in this chapel in Arkansas, you can see that the chapel is designed to blend with the forest, and the verticality and the trees are inspiring what the architecture is. So the architecture gets its meaning for its relationship with the place, with the nature around. And this is something that is very American. And when I say American, I mean America from the Americas, from North, South, and Central America. It's one of the great contributions of American architecture to the world. Go next. You can see that happening in Mexico with architects like Luis Barragan, very, very world-renowned architect that started to feel like the architecture could relate to the environment. In this case, for example, is the volcanic environment of Mexico City. And he said, we can make architecture that creates a dialogue with that beautiful environment that most people thought it was completely barren and not necessarily suitable for inhabitation. And he transformed that into a very enriching dialogue. In the South American continent, go next, you can see that the most famous architect from Brazil, Oscar Niemeyer, was doing modern architecture that was not following the principles of the Europeans. His modern architecture was responding to this very exuberant vegetation of the Brazilian environment where he worked in Rio de Janeiro. So it was more organic, more fluid. It was not necessarily looking for right angles. It was more free and more related to the forms and the shapes. And he didn't mind to integrate those rocks and the vegetation. So there was a very interesting way for modern architecture to have a distinct personality in the Americas, in North, Central, and South America. That is fascinating to me, and sometimes it's not fully appreciated because we have still a very Western European reading of everything, like everything that comes from Europe is the source, and in a way this was changing that discourse. Go to the next one. So when you think about the title of the lecture and this relation with nature, the notion of Arcadia comes, the word Arcadia is a real place in Greece, but it comes from mythological times that they were, when the mythological readings of the landscape, and the sense of Arcadia as an ideal and almost like a utopian place of harmony with nature. So the idea of humans living in harmony with nature is very common in many cultures. And it's a dream almost like that many human beings find very appealing, the notion of having a place where we can connect with nature and have a harmonious life with nature. So that's where the Arcadian dream is from. And that's the name of the title of our new book and the title of the lecture, Building a New Arcadia. How do we create places where people can flourish, can thrive in connection with nature? Austin is a place where all that has happened to a very, very high degree because we have been trying to be very conscious about how we relate with nature. So you go next. When you think about cities, cities have tried to do that in different ways, consciously or unconsciously. We saw Tikal, go next. So you can see that that's a result of building in an environment that is very hostile, the forest, the tropical forest, but it has had an impact on how people live. So people live dispersed in this forest, this very intense tropical forest. In the case of Austin, the forest has grown with the city. We live in an urban forest, but the single family houses are spread through the forest. And in case of Tikal, go next, the result of why the city looks the way it looks is because they were adapting to this very specific topography. So there were highs and lows and the water, and they built whatever there was a little higher, so when the rainy season came, it will not flood. So the buildings are dispersed, looking for those propitious places to be built. Next. So in doing this, the city has this kind of unusual shape. There are no streets in the conventional way because everybody is looking for those high moments in this topography, and the city becomes very dispersed and very low density. So go next. There were other environments where they built in the ancient times. This is the ancient capital of Tenochtitlan in Mexico City. I mean, Mexico City is right now literally on top of this. And you can see that in this lake environment, they learned how to deal with the lake, and they expanded the city by dredging the lake and then building chinampas that they grew for agriculture. And the city basically created a very beautiful symbiosis between city and activities that we normally think that happen outside the city, but in this case were happening on the outskirts of the city in the chinampas. So beautiful adaptations to the environment. Go to the next one. When the Spaniards arrived in the Americas, they didn't build the cities that they look like the cities that they have left in Spain. The medieval cities were very crowded. Like we said, they built cities that were more orderly, and they were looking for an idea of a city that was transferring a sense of order in the territory, and the idea that the city could expand. Cities in the Americas, except for a few examples in the Caribbean, were open cities. So the city could grow. It didn't have walls. It was meant to grow in and expand into the landscape. You go to the next one, you can see that these cities, curiously enough, already existed in Mexico. And places like Cholula, the idea of a grid that expands into the territory was already part of the indigenous cultures, and how they, in a way, took that idea into the landscape and the division of the agricultural land. Next. So cities today, like for example, Valladolid, we did a studio that was an architecture studio in this city. What you can see here is that forest goes into that grid, and you can see the green coming into this grid. So there's a sense of overlapping those with a very different character than cities in the US, but the same concept. In this case, a lot of the vegetation happens inside the courtyards, and the blocks are more defined on the perimeter, and there's more density in the city center. Go next. You can see that the city center gets more density because it gets built up more, but the grid remains the main driver of how the city is organized. Go to the next. So it is also happening in the US. So in the North America, the Anglo-America, so this is the Spanish America. In the Anglo-America, the grid became also a very practical tool, not only the Jeffersonian grid to think about the whole territory, but cities. And Austin is not an exception. So many cities in the US were founded with a grid too, and Austin is one of those. And you can see that the city was open since its conception. It was a city that was open and it could expand. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. So when you look at a city like this and you evolve and you take, let's see, 170 years later, go next. You can see that the city has grown, the center has more density, and the city expands, and the trees and the vegetation starts becoming more dominant as you get outside this center. Go next. When you think about that close-up of the fabric of the city, you can see that Austin, since its inception, has been basically a place where people live in single-family houses. There was a Congress Avenue that had a higher density, but the city has always been a city with low density and with people living mostly in single-family houses. So when this grid allows for that urban forest to grow, this is what you get. Go to the next one. You get the trees become very dominant, and that's one of the things that many people take for granted for Austin. It's probably the one thing that I think is the best thing of Austin is the tree canopy of the city. And you can see that when you look at this image, you say, well, this probably looks like a nice place to live, because you have all those trees and all that vegetation shading and creating beauty. And it's like now with the pandemic, we're becoming even more aware of how important it is to connect with nature and have this ability to relate to it. So this is how that fabric gets mature over time, and the trees grow, and the trees become a very important part of this symbiosis of city and nature. Go to the next one. So when we build there in these environments, this is now I'm going to start showing you work that we have done as a professional architect, and you can see how these become a very nice place when you have a tree like that and you want to be in that space. And being under a tree is universally a very appealing thing for humans, because you are protected from the shade. It's a beautiful living creature that provides shelter and and protection. So when you have trees like this, you try to build around them. So we always say that trees are the first thing that we have to think about when doing any project. So this is a blessing for Austin to have these kind of trees all around the city. Go to the next one. So we build thinking about how we can take advantage of that, how we can work with trees to create spaces, almost the way we were thinking about the mountains in the pre-Columbian times, using them to create spaces. Go to the next one. So all these creates the hills of Austin also create interesting combinations of trees and hills, and how do you adapt to that? So go to the next. So there's a house that we did, and another house that we did, where you have views, you have connections with the hills, and the ability to see the landscape from vantage points that the sites that are in hilly side allow. And this is something that you take advantage of. So how do you react to that? So the architecture is trying to take advantage of those possibilities. Go to the next one. So you have views, you have sun. So you need to shade, you need to protect, in our architecture, we put a lot of emphasis in those structures that protect you, that give you that sense of protection and the ability to connect with that beautiful landscape. Go to the next one. So this is the same project seen from the other side. You can see that the protection with that visor is a very critical aspect of how do you deal with the harsh sun, and how do you take, environmentally, you make better that connection by at the same time protecting from the sun. Go to the next one. So all these shade structures have taken different shapes, but these are one of the drivers of how we can make enjoying the outside better. Shade structure is a good thing to have. And go to the next one. So the inside and the outside, how do you connect the inside of the outside? That's another aspect that makes a building more appealing, because you feel like you're bringing that outside inside. So this is something we always look for in our project, how to bring that the outside into the inside. Go to the next one. And then you have water. So that's another thing that is fantastic about Austin and appeals a lot of people. You have the lakes, you have the creeks, you have, it makes a city that the city needs to protect those waterways. Barton Springs exists because a lot of people in Austin took very seriously protecting it. Otherwise, it would not exist. People I'm talking about a long time ago that saw the importance of places like that, where we connect with nature. So when you go next, you see things in Austin that are amazing. You have creeks and flows, and the city needs to know how to deal with this, natural flows and natural phenomenon and rain events, and so it affects the way we plan the city. So the city is very well regulated for us to try to react to those things, and it's changing, and it's the source of controversy because some people are in favor of one thing and another, but this is the reality. And so we end up with things like this, where we have water and buildings that can adapt to the water, and we build in ways that we relate to the environment. So all these buildings are very light on purpose to provide an architecture that intervenes in a light way. So if you look at, you're going a little fast, it's moving automatically here. Okay, so when you look at these environments, for example, you look at places like this, it's hard to imagine when people see this from outside Austin that these places are within the municipal boundaries of the city. Many people think that all those places that I just showed you must be someplace outside the city. No, they are all inside the city. And this is what is remarkable about Austin with the water. So in this project, I'm going to show you, for example, a bridge that we did. Go next. This bridge is this is the sketch, and go next. This is the bridge built. It's in a this is an example of an architecture that is trying to integrate with environment. So you can see that the architecture, the engineering of this bridge, the art of this bridge, whatever you want to call it, is trying to connect with the place in the way that we have seen that is a very important tradition in the Americas, in the way I see it, the way I have studied it. And I think that this is an example of how the architecture is trying to connect with the place and relate. So this is built very simply with rebars, and it's very simple, left to rust, and it's a way to just connect with the place. It's from the down below, from the sides. You can see the next one. You can see the bridge in different times of the year. During the winter, the vegetation changes. In the summer, after several years, this, go back a little bit. You went a little too fast on that one. So you can see that the vegetation makes the bridge almost disappear. I love this. This is when I love those moments where the architecture almost goes away, and the place is more defined by that subtle intervention, right? So this is a moment of that symbiosis with nature. Go to the next one. So when we did this is what is interesting. This is when we just finished the project, the bridge, the guest house that is on that side. And then when you revisit this, go back to the next. So you can see that the vegetation has changed dramatically. This is the same place. You can see that that's the guest house, and you can see that the vegetation is showing how much power it has, right? So if we abandon buildings in Austin for whatever reason, vegetation will eventually take over. The same way they happen in Maya cities where they were abandoned. Go to the next one. I look at this photograph and it reminded me of the Maya ruins. When you see all those pyramids that were completely covered by the vegetation, and the archaeologists have been uncovering them. I always said that if Austin was abandoned, 600-700 years from now, people would be uncovering buildings the way we are doing now with the ancient Maya cities, because nature will take over. The same way it's doing that you have to constantly keep nature at bay. Go to the next one. And you can see the vegetation, the way that places evolve because the vegetation around changes. That's the guest house entrance. This is the guest house from the inside. You can see that the idea is that you make it very transparent so you can see all that beautiful environment all around. And this is something that we apply to the bedrooms as well. Go to the next one. So when you are in the space, you just want to let that nature come in. So we have shutters that allow the house to be closed completely, but when you open, you want to take advantage. So almost like being in a tree house. Go to the next one. So the idea of how the architecture is related to this is trying to protect it, but at the same time take advantage of those views. So it's glass, but it can be closed down with the shutters. Go to the next one. And in the main house, in this case, we had a very different approach around a courtyard. So we like to explore typologies that are different. Go to the next one. So the main house is organized around a courtyard. So there's a bridge that connects them. And then there's a house that is organized around a courtyard. And we're going to see some images just to show you how, in a way you create an environment that is, connected with the land. The stone is the limestone. There's a courtyard. Keep going. We're going to show some images of the house. The courtyard, you can see how everything is organized around a courtyard. I don't understand why we don't use the courtyard more in the US. It's not part of the Anglo tradition, but it's definitely part of the Spanish Mediterranean tradition. And it was already existing in the Americas. and is not being, applied as much in the environment that we live in Texas, where it would be so easy to take advantage of. Keep going. So the inside is letting also a lot of the materials from the outside come inside. Keep going. We're going to see some examples of this. Keep going. And the courtyard, and the outside. So letting, in this case, it's very extreme. You can see the glass almost feels like it's not there. So you have a sense that the outside can come in completely. Go. Keep going. So this is another one we're going to show just to give you a sense of how these very, private environments we can create in our houses can be complemented with another way to think about the city. Go to the next one. So we're going to see another house that has, this one is in Dallas, which is very similar to Austin in sense of the vegetation, and it has very unique features that are allowing, this is the sketch that shows the concept of a vertical house surrounded by nature. Keep going. We're going to see how that happened in this extreme, case with this wonderful garden. This is very close to downtown Dallas. People have a hard time believing it. And it's just like the ability to create a garden around a house, and then how the glass allows you to feel connected to it. The details that allow to do that, it goes a lot of thinking in how to make it happen. So that's what I tell my students in construction, you need to know how to build it. Go to the next one. So the details, go to the next one, and how you can build something that gives you that sense of connection with the landscape. Keep going. We're going to go quickly showing some images of this place to reinforce this notion of how the whole house is trying to connect this beautiful garden. Waterfall, and go to the next one. It's obviously this is not as big a house as big a lot as it may look, but it is very private because of the dense vegetation all around. So all the plants are trying to emphasize that connection with the outside, and you can see the vegetation on the outside is making the building feel like connected with the landscape, and it's very vertical because on the top you get to see the downtown view, and you can see also that Dallas is also like a forest, also by the time you look at it from above the canopy. So go to the next. So cities need, in addition to those private environments, they also need public spaces, they need pedestrian streets, they need meeting places, and they need landmarks. So there's another thing that the landscape city, like Austin, needs to learn how to do, which is to be better at creating public spaces and be better at creating streets. So when you go to the next one, you can see that in this project in East Austin, we try to create a building that is not suburban in nature, in the sense that we want to bring the building close to the street. Go to the next one, and you can see that the idea of this building is like, let's bring the building right to the street. So you go to the next one, you see the whole building was conceived to create a very, very pleasant environment for pedestrians along the street. So how to make pedestrian streets is a very important aspect of what we need to do. So this is the driver of this project, how to make a better street for pedestrians. Keep going. So we're going to see another one, and also having eyes on the street. So you want to have that friendly relationship with the street. So let people see you see outside, and the porch is a universal sense of welcoming for a building. Go to the next one. So we're going to see another project, keep going, that is doing that. It's trying to create a street that is better for pedestrians. In addition to bike and obviously cars, this is in the East Austin, also in the former airport and the performance center. And the whole idea was trying to create an environment that is pedestrian friendly all around. So this is the focus of this project. You go going, but at the same time, it's a gathering place. So these are the ideas, the sketches of how to create that pedestrian environment. Go to the next. And how to create that canopy that surrounds the entire building. Go next. And how that is transparent at the eye level, so people from the inside can see outside, people from the outside can see inside. Go to the next one. So when there are events, you can see the street. Go to the next. But you go, you can always see the art and the things that are happening at the eye level. We're protecting the upper part from the sun and the canopy. And then when there's activity, you see that connection with the street, and the street sees the activity inside. But at the end, we're creating a place for people to meet. Go to the next one. So the idea is that there's a place for people to gather. Now we have COVID, we have the pandemic. We are not doing this, but this is an essential part of human beings' needs, that we need to get together. And we need to get together for different uses, for performances, for entertainment, for culture, for religious and spiritual reasons. So we're going to go to the next very quickly, just to show another example of a need to gather. This is a Hindu temple in Austin, Texas. Austin is a very diverse city, and we were hired to do a Hindu temple. And this is just to show, you keep going, it's a school and a temple. But the idea of this temple is that it's providing another basic need for people to be able to gather. It's inspired in ancient architectural systems and creating courtyards. But at the end of the day, this is the essence. If you keep going, you're going to see the essence of why we're doing a building like this. We're doing a building that allows people to gather. Go to the next one. These are the details, too much detail for this, but you'll see in a second, if you go to the next one, this is the building, the main altar. And this is what I want to show you. No, go back to that one. Go back to that one. That's the one that I was trying to go. So in addition to private spaces, we need to create spaces for people to gather and people to enjoy the community and the act of getting together. This is a human need. Cities need to provide both. And this is an example for a very particular need, but it is a very important need, the gathering for cultural, spiritual, religious, entertaining reasons. Go to the next one. We're going to see the next project is going to be another example of another need to get together. This is for entertaining. It's very ambitious. It's the Formula One track in Austin. And we were lucky to work in all the buildings outside the track. And you can see the tower there. So we did the just hold 1 second on this one. We did no, you can stay there. Yeah, the tower is one of the aspects that we did for this building because we need landmarks. That's another thing that I said. Cities need buildings that can make easier for people to orient themselves and to orient a place that is confusing, like a large track. So the notion of having a landmark allows for people to read their cities. Like in Paris, you orient yourself with the Eiffel Tower. You know where you are because you see a Eiffel Tower, you're looking at Paris. So that's another role that architecture and buildings can play to help identify and create identifiable places. Everybody in the world knows that when they see this tower, that this is the Formula One track in Austin. So it has that ability to create that immediate impact. So go to the next one. So you can see that in a way, we're creating places for people to gather for events like this. And this requires another approach, and this is a building that had to happen very quickly. Go to the next. So we had to develop very, this is to me what we all miss, right? The notion of being together. This is like looking at this in the pandemic. It feels like, oh my God, this is crazy. Look at how close we used to be. This is the way, we think about spaces that are meant for gathering. But now we have to be patient and wait a little bit until we can do this again. Go to the next one. So this building had to build very quickly, so we did it in modules so we can reproduce it and build it very quickly in steel, not concrete, and creating spaces for people to almost like recreating a Rambla, a street that people can walk and enjoy the events, but also enjoy the gathering of people from all over the world that come for these events. So all this plays a role into the architecture, creating shade, keep going, creating places for people to gather. And for example, here we took advantage of the track construction to create a performance space, an auditorium that can hold more than 6,000 people seated here. And so you are seeing another reason for people to gather for concert, live music in Austin. So you have an iconic building with a gathering, you create a sense of identity, a sense of place. And that's another thing that we need to complement with the private spaces. So the public side of life. Go to the next one. The sketch that generated that idea. Go to the next one. And the sense how that tower became a symbol of the sense of the identity of the track. Go to the next one. And the notion of how the TV crews always look for ways to frame the tower in their telecast when they're showing the races or the X Games or whatever. There's always a sense of how that helps identify the place. You can have this picture anywhere unless you have that tower and you know where you are. The details, the thrill of putting a glass floor and people going up to the top. Everybody enjoys going to the top and have a view of a place from the top. When you go to the Empire State Building, or when you go to the Eiffel Tower, you get that vantage point that allows us to understand a place. Go to the next one. And at the end, I like this to show how the tower is also trying to capture the sense of speed of the city. I mean, of the track. and the notion of that being captured in the building. I wanted to just finish with two very quick reference to the Alumni Center. And this is what I was saying, that I'm super sad that it's not possible to have this lecture there. We have developed a very close relationship with that building, because with Jim Boone as the director, we work in 2 projects there, and it was a fantastic experience to get to know all the people working there and how the building works. We created the Texas Longhorns, the Texas Cowboys Pavilion on the north end, and this is a picture that I want to emphasize. Go back to that picture. It's hard, when I show this picture to people, I said, it's hard to believe that this is 90 steps from a stadium of almost 100,000 people. People think that this picture may be taken somewhere in a national park. This is next to the auditorium well, next to the Alumni Center. So go back to the next. So when we did this pavilion, we were trying to, so that's the picture, number 3 up there. That's where the picture I took. I took that picture myself. So this pavilion, we wanted to do very transparent to connect. So we have done the Texas Cowboys Pavilion there. Go next. We're going to show some images just to show, because we're going to go into the question and answers. But you can see the lightness also and the transparency. So we wanted the campus to literally flow through the site, is balanced with cables, and then the side on the creek on the right hand side is just very easily connected. And you can see that we created these shades that you can roll down. Go to the next. That when there are events, you can have a sense of separation. But before games, you know that I'm sure that there are Texas Cowboys in the audience that enjoy gathering there. So that's another moment. I don't have a good photo of the whole pavilion full of people, where they gather before and after games. So another aspect of the architecture that is very important, creating places for people to gather, working around nature. In this case, literally, we were going around the trees. Go to the next. And then go to the next, the stadium. And then the addition that we did on the north end, when we changed the catering kitchen and created places, a new entrance. This used to be the loading dock. So we were trying to be very respectful to the original building, but we tried to create an aesthetic inside a little more, streamlined and more sharp in a way. And you can see when you go inside, the stairs, slider, and the notion of the space. And I love the fact that this was also the first slide that when you were saying that the show is about to start, that's the slide background that you had. So this is something that we did for the Texas Exes, and it was a very wonderful experience to work with the Texas Exes. So we're very happy with our relationship, and I want to just show a couple more images and wait for any questions that the audience may have. So, well, before we do that, go to the next one. Just wanted to mention that a lot of the ideas and articles and drawings, and there's an essay that I wrote, several articles that other people wrote about our work are in a book called Building a New Arcadia we just published. This is something UT Press did. It was another fantastic opportunity to work with another aspect of the University of Texas that is making me very proud to be a professor, be published by UT Press. And doing the professional work here in Austin is available, and just wanted to, I cannot not tell you, based on the idea of like the book just came out. So UT Press will be very happy to know that I have announced it in the lecture. But now I'm done. Thank you very much. Go to the next. And I think thank you for listening. I wish I could see all of you, but I'm very happy to answer questions even if I don't see you.
Yes, we got a couple questions, Juan, but I'll read out and let you answer. John asks, how are architects approaching a goal of places connected with nature while maintaining affordability in Austin and other major cities? Mid or high rise with a large footprint with smaller affordable units to put more people into a more dense space doesn't seem to, on its face, lend itself to a connection with nature. So he's saying, these high mid-rise and high-rise, it's hard to have that connection with nature, but if you don't do that, how do you achieve density?
Well, it is a very interesting question, because in the academic circles is very much presented as almost like an unquestionable truth that you have to increase density to make cities better in general. And I happen to have knowing what what I have said, I said that cities are different and they require different solutions for their problems. So cities very dense cities can be horrible places to live that are not affordable, that have crime. Low density cities can be horrible places to live that have crime, that have affordability issues. So I don't think that the density is the solution to all the city problems. So I think that you're right, that one of the things that the compact cities do, like Madrid, is that nature inside is very much eliminated. The water flows underground. The infrastructure is built on mechanical systems that are not necessarily adapted to the flows of nature. So I think that the solutions need to be very particular to each place, but I'm not necessarily a believer that just more density is the solution, because you need to be careful by looking at examples. Even from the point of view of segregation and all the social dimension, you can segregate people in low density environments and in high density environments. So that's not necessarily the solution either. So to relate to nature, I think it's true that the high density is not necessarily the only answer. So I'm basically investigating in class now with my students how low density cities like Austin that have that in their DNA can be bringing more affordability, more ways to increase and facilitate mobility. And you can see with the pandemic, working from home, having even modest outside spaces make life better for everybody involved. There are ways to do it with mid-rise also, and there's another thing that is called low rise density, which means more density in a low rise environment. That to me is what probably Austin needs to look for. Better typologies to get more people to enjoy all the things that we like, but do it in more efficiently. That's to me the solution. Go to the next one.
So that kind of leads into this question. Do you think the pandemic will change how gathering spaces are designed and constructed in the future?
Well, I think that we're going to see, yes, I think that we will find more, in a way the pandemic has fast forward the future for us. I mean, we are seeing things that we probably were going to eventually be doing, which is having lectures. For example, I could give a lecture in Boston without traveling to Boston, and we didn't think about that before. Now we're going to have less traveling, less gathering for things that we think that easily can be recreated in other ways that are not ideal. So at the end of the day, I think that we're still going to look for spaces where we can gather, and we can gather in the ways that we have gathered before the pandemic. So people are going to look for that normalcy, but it's going to be affecting how much of that we need at the pace that we were doing before. I think that we're going to see that there are a lot of things that we don't need to literally go to another place to do if we have the ability to do it with the technology. But the public spaces are going to eventually come back, and they're going to be used very similar to the way we used them before.
Okay, and this question kind of pertains to that public space idea. There's currently an effort underway to envision a new Zilker Park master plan. What do you think are the most important parameters to consider in this effort? Do you think it can be improved, or is it perfect as it is? So that's Zilker Park in Austin, where ACL happens and Barton Springs is located.
Well, I mean, I think that Zilker Park is another jewel for Austin to have, and I think that one of the biggest challenges that we have is that, in a way, we hear from a lot of people that are living nearby that there's and people that go to the park from far away, is that there are probably too many events that close the park for extended periods of time. That's one of the challenges. What happens, we all like to have ACL festival, but then it means that the park is closed before and after for long periods of time. So how to balance that specific event with the ability to use the park more often is a big challenge. I mean, one of the things, and that's one comment in general, but the other one that I think things that can happen is like the area between Mopac and the beginning of the volleyball fields has really become like a parking structure. Parking, surface parking, and I think that improving all that will be a very important part, how to do it instead of leaving it dirt. There are ways, if it's going to be parking, there are ways to do it where you can have grass green. There are ways to do something that it looks green when it's not used as a parking, that can accommodate cars. There are inventive ways to have that overflow parking used. So the parking area is one of the challenges of Zilker, obviously. I think it would be good to create like some type of shade structure that allows for gatherings that are not associated to events that can be part of the park. There is a light. I'm saying this because we did a proposal for that a long time ago, but I think it's an opportunity to use a very large scale element that can be used for shading in addition to the trees. So there are definitely ways to improve the park. And I think that there are a lot of very good things to preserve, but there are always opportunities to improve. So we constantly need to look for opportunities to improve.
Yeah. And I guess we'll take this as the last question because we've got 2 minutes left. How do you think Austin can still embrace nature and its architecture, given how quickly the city is growing and new buildings are going up everywhere?
Well, I think it's going to be this balance. I think in a way we see that there's a clear commitment to do a very dense, compact city in the center part of the city. But it's understandable how neighborhoods are trying to resist, changing the character of those neighborhoods. So I think it's going to be this back and forth where we have to find ways to add density where it feels like it can operate in a way that is giving options, giving alternatives. When I moved to Austin, there were not many alternatives. You live in a house, or there were not many appealing options, let's say. So now I think that the city can create higher density in corridors that connect specific nodes within the city. When you think about, for example, the Domain, there's a higher density Domain enclave there, and there are going to be others that are going to need to happening in different places. But I think that I think that there's a way to do it, balancing the character of the low density neighborhoods that we already have that need to be preserved by combining very strategically high density in certain areas. So we need to increase density, but we don't need to do it in a way that destroys the character of all the neighborhoods that are already established, or even closing the door for creating new neighborhoods that are not necessarily high density on the outskirts of the city. We just need to do it as smartly as we can. And I think that we should do it in a way that we invent new typologies that are low density, but are doing more efficiently the things that we look for when we're doing low density.
Okay, so I think we're going to throw it to Patricia to do the outro.
Wow. Hi, everyone. What another fantastic lunchtime lecture. Thank you, Professor Miró and Bud Frank, for joining us today. I really enjoyed learning more about your architectural philosophy and the contributions not only to the City of Austin, but to the Alumni Center as well. And thank you to everyone that participated in this month's event. We love being able to connect virtually with all of you, whether you're here in Austin or across the country. And next month is Texas Independence Day is coming up, and our March lunchtime lecture will be diving into Texas politics from 1929 to 1932. Dr. Rachel Ozan's lecture, Biscuits, the Dole, and Nodding Donkeys, will be held on March 22nd. That's a Monday this time. You don't want to miss that one. We're also excited to announce that we've rescheduled Dr. Lichtenstein's lecture titled Why Holocaust and Genocide Studies, A Historian's Perspective, for Wednesday, April 28th. You can learn more about both events and register for them online at texasexes.org/lunchtime lectures. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful week.